I'll just put it up to the side.
It's cool. It makes you look cool.
Yeah, it's just really
I feel like
important.
Charlie would be unhappy.
If it wasn't
Our
an abortion
distributor
movie,
would
we
be,
couldn't
yeah,
drink on
it was
camera.
any other
but
movie. Yeah.
Yeah. Casually sips.
I'll just cut out these parts.
All right, well, we'll get right into it here then, I guess. Now, Lana, you've done films before, and I just wanted to ask
Actually,
you.
it's Martha.
Martha,
and
sorry.
that's Martha.
No
So, yeah, no worries.
Maybe we'll cut that out. I was actually watching interviews before, and I was like, okay, I have to make sure I get this all straight. But so
no
you've
worries.
done films before then, and then, or is it the inverse? I was a little interested about your
Martha
collaboration.
has, yeah.
Martha has,
Yeah.
okay, but it
And
was
I'm Lana, yeah.
you came up with the idea for
Right.
the documentary, though,
Right,
So I was
yeah.
wondering if you talk a bit about how that
Yeah,
all
sure.
worked out. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I came up with the idea. I wasn't a filmmaker. I was a curator for an arts festival. And I was just watching the news after Dr. Tiller's death and was really shocked by what had happened, but also just frustrated by the media coverage of his death. It was just, they would always say, a controversial doctor has been killed, and they would get a talking point from each side of the issue, and that was about it. And I was so frustrated that they weren't giving even the most basic biographical information about this man. It was just a very hands-off treatment, and I just wondered, he was killed in a church. Isn't that surprising that the number one villain of the anti-abortion movement was deeply religious, was killed in his own church? And then he'd been shot before, and I thought, why would someone go back to work after being shot? Like, why would you give up so much to do this work where you're vilified by so many people? And then wondering, now that he's gone, like, who's left to keep doing this work? Is there anyone left? What are their lives like as the focal point of so much anti-abortion pressure and harassment? And so, yeah, I had the idea. Wasn't a filmmaker. Friend said, I was like, someone should make a documentary on Tiller. And then I was just like, I should make a documentary on Tiller. Like, I should do it on the present day people. And a very wise friend, I was kind of saying, but I can't do it. I don't want to make a film. And he was like, well, the only thing stopping you from being a filmmaker is just making a film. And I luckily had this wonderful friend, Martha, who'd been working in documentaries since college. And it just seemed like the perfect chance to collaborate. So I asked her if she would collaborate with me on the film.
Yeah. So yeah, I had been working in documentary. I produced a documentary that looked at bisexuality in America, and then I've been doing a bunch of sort of freelance work that had to do with healthcare and similar issues. And so yeah, it seemed like a natural collaboration, and I just, I thought it was such a brilliant idea for a film, just because, I was shocked, like most people, to learn that there are only 4 doctors in a country the size of the U.S. that will openly perform this procedure, and why are there so few people, and what are the reasons why women are seeking these later abortions. So it just seemed like a really rich subject for a film.
Right. The timing, I think, was interesting too. I guess not you lucked out in terms of how awful 2012 was in terms of the discussion around the abortion debate, legitimate rape and Romney's campaign and everything in 2012. But I'm interested. I think we're roughly the same age. Did you find that there's now, in the same way that people think feminism is passé, it's been done, that there's that idea around the abortion debate as well, that the battle's been fought? What's there to actually talk about anymore?
Yeah, well, there definitely is a generational split, and we're 29. We were born, when we were born, Roe versus Wade had been passed, and we've grown up, from relatively privileged backgrounds where we could have access to contraception and abortion if we needed it. It has always seemed like something you could always get. But, that's not true in a lot of the country, and it's not true for lower income women a lot of the time. So it's different everywhere. But we have noticed that a lot of younger women are really judgmental of women seeking abortions, and that's statistically true too, that younger women tend to say, why is she getting an abortion? What, she didn't have contraception, or what was the reason? And the interesting thing about third trimester abortions is that a lot of the cases you see have nothing to do with that. They're fetal anomalies in the pregnancy, or they're victims of rape. They're things that fall outside of the typical reasons you think that someone might need an abortion. So we hope that by showing these stories and these circumstances that you could just never possibly imagine, that it will help kind of open the eyes of especially that younger generation to realizing circumstances can develop that I could never possibly imagine or think that I'd find myself in, but sometimes these situations do come up. So
Yeah, I think that's good.
And
That's a great
she's
answer.
got it.
We can just, yeah.
Well, just ditto.
That's
You can just
fine.
sit through the rest of it.
Ditto.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's got it. Nailed it.
She's got
Perfect.
it. True. We sort of like, yeah.
True.
I would have said the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like it happened to be a good collaboration then. There's
Yeah,
this
we have a mind.
Yeah.
meld.
a mind
Yeah.
meld. Yeah. You can be like the Coen brothers and then just you start
Yes.
Just finish each other's
Yeah,
No one
sentences.
can even
Yeah,
distinguish
exactly.
us anymore.
Exactly.
I know.
Yeah, apparently
Right.
not even me. Just hacking it up. Well, so
We're
we're
used
making
to that.
Yeah. But I guess I was interested too then because there is this, this idea that it's, the battle's been fought, whatever,
Right.
then to focus on third trimester abortion. Wonder if you could talk about that decision, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, it was sort of a random thing because we started out with the interest in Dr. Tiller and wanting to understand, wanting to find who else was doing this work. And we didn't know a lot about third trimester abortion at the time. We didn't, it's less than 1% of abortions in America, and so it's not something, even people who are extremely pro-choice know very, very little about it. So that was one of the most interesting things about making the film, was just finding out how different it is, I think, than most earlier abortions, in the sense that, as you see in the film, a lot of these pregnancies are wanted pregnancies, and they find out really late that there's something devastatingly wrong with the fetus. And so it's really more of a, as a parenting decision, it's about trying to decide if you want to bring a child into the world that's going to really suffer. And so that was really made it, so much more complicated. And also sort of, we found that the women who are coming for third trimester abortions were, because they were either wanted pregnancies or they were women who were trying to abort because they've been trying for ages to get an abortion and couldn't. But we found that they were just a really diverse group of women in terms of their political views, their religious views. They weren't sort of like the dyed-in-the-wool liberals that you might expect to find at a clinic like that. They were really coming from a variety of backgrounds. So I think for us, it was a real learning experience to find out what third trimester abortion is all about and how different it is.
And sorry, not sorry.
Yeah.
That's
No, I wasn't sure if you were gonna.
Oh, no. Go ahead.
I was interested then as well in terms of approaching your subject, and I'd like to return to the women who are in the clinic as well, but the 4 doctors who are profiled as well. In approaching them, was there any sort of reticence on their part to partake? Because it is, and you see in the documentary, their lives are very much at risk in performing these procedures.
Yeah, there was. There are 4 subjects, 2 men and 2 women, and the 2 men agreed very quickly. They were more public figures. They'd been on news programs before, they appeared on CNN after Dr. Tiller's death, so they were more out there and comfortable with that, so they signed on pretty quickly. The women, it took almost a year to agree, to convince them to be in the movie, partly because Dr. Tiller never did interviews. That was his policy, and they trained with Dr. Tiller, and for him it was like, it's not about me, it's about the patients. But then the problem that came up over the years is that, the anti-abortion movement is making this completely about the doctors. They're vilifying the doctors. That's their target. That's their goal. And if there's a vacuum of information about someone, if you don't see who someone is, then whatever information is put out there, that's all there is to it, So we put it to them as, this is a chance. We want to tell your story. We want to give you a voice here. We don't think anyone knows the perspective of abortion providers very well. And a year later, they did do one interview on a television show where they didn't get a lot of blowback from protesters. They felt more comfortable with that. And they also thought, this is the chance to tell our stories. And they didn't want only men as the abortion providers in our movie as well. And we're really thrilled that they did decide to be a part of the movie because they're so essential. You saw it. They're really essential, and we can't even imagine now what the movie would have been like without them. And also just that these are the only 4. There are 4 doctors in the country. It's so important to get to have all of them in the movie since they're the last 4.
Some of the most powerful scenes too involve the 2 female doctors during the counseling sessions, and I'm interested how you were able to get that footage even. Of these women, the counseling sessions of talking about why they're going through with the procedure.
Yeah, that was mostly due to just the really close collaboration that we had with the doctors and the counselors in the clinic, because they were the ones who first would introduce the idea and just explain there are these filmmakers here, don't be afraid, they're not going to film you unless they have your like express permission, and they would just explain a little bit about why we wanted to make this film. And I think a lot of the patients who did agree, I mean, it was a lot of waiting for someone to agree to be on camera, so we spent a lot of time just sort of hanging out in the clinic waiting for something to happen. But when they did agree, it was mostly because they felt like these stories just haven't been heard before. No one understands why I'm here seeking a third trimester abortion. So it was just wanting to get those stories out there, but at the same time, the majority of patients we talked to didn't want to have their privacy compromised. They wanted to be able to go home to their communities and you know, not have to explain to people later on, not have that story be totally out in the open. So we found that the just showing the hands and the feet was incredibly sort of emotionally expressive, and so we were able to just use that, and hopefully it worked pretty well. But yeah, it was really the collaboration with the doctors and counselors that made it possible for us to find those patients who did want to tell their stories.
Yeah, and we tried to, when we were in the room, we just made ourselves literally as small as possible. Crouching in the corner, flattened against the wall. You know, it was just us and a cinematographer, and one of us would do sound. And, you know, it was hard because these women are going through some of the most difficult experiences of their lives and this real emotional challenge. We didn't want to interfere with their emotional process, but I think that because their stories were so wrenching that I think they really did forget about us being in the room, you know, because they were so absorbed in this and this was so difficult that I don't think we did intrude. And if anything, a couple of them said to us, you know, it was nice to have someone else to tell this story to. It's that kind of relief of the confession, you know. So I think that if anything, it was helpful to have us there for most of the women who we filmed with.
And I'm glad you brought up as well the filming of hands, or even just like feet crossing, something like that, because I assumed it was partly necessity that they said they can't have their faces shown, but that is also it is extremely powerful and makes an interesting juxtaposition between these stories being so individual, but at the same time, because there is no one face to it, universal as well.
Right.
Yeah, I wonder if you could talk a bit about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, that was just really a process of experimentation. You know, we filmed in a couple different sort of styles. At first, when we were filming patients and obscuring their identities, and then we had a cinematographer, Hilary Sparrow, who came on board, and she really helped us develop that style. And we started shooting just really only hands, and just having the sort of the side of the face and the doctor there, and we just realized that we sort of immediately realized that was the most powerful way. And I think also there's a lot of power to seeing the women who are pregnant, that you can see that they're visibly pregnant and they're talking about what this pregnancy means to them, and I think there's a lot of power to that, to actually seeing their pregnant stomachs, and just hands, and the hands were really expressive. They're going through so much, and you can really tell that from all of their body language.
Yeah, because I feel like if it would have been like a 60-minute blur out voice alteration thing, would have really
the blur out. What does that imply? It implies that you're a criminal. Basically, I mean, and that's so often how abortion providers are portrayed too. You think of the abortion doctor, and they're in the shadows, or their face is blurred out, or their identity is hidden, and that was so central to this. Pulling back a curtain and shining a light on this incredibly secretive, stigmatized thing. So having blur outs would have had the opposite effect. Yeah.
Well, and I think when I was watching it as well, I had the exact same. Use the metaphor of I was pulling back a curtain on this. And as much as it is a profile of the doctors, it's also a profile of a physical space as well. And I guess, and that's largely a lot of the film is shot in abortion clinics as well, which is a space people don't normally see, or many people don't. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, it was hard. A lot of credit again to our cinematographer on this, because we were like, okay, we're going to be in the clinics a lot. It's a little claustrophobic. You're always indoors. It's a medical office. How can we make this look filmic? She used these vintage lenses that gave her this beautiful filmic quality. We had a 35 millimeter adapter on the camera the whole time. And yeah, it is the kind of, I love in the film one patient says that it was shocking to her how all these protesters are screaming outside the clinic, and then she comes in such a warm, loving place. And I think that is, I guess, a little bit surprising, just the degree of how warm it is and how people treat the patients there with such respect and kindness. It's just not way beyond what you'd ever expect. So.
Sorry.
Oh, no. I was just agreeing again.
And how long did you actually, and I'm assuming you started then researching and planning in 2009 when Dr. Tiller was assassinated. How long did you actually film for? What was the duration of the project?
It was, let's see, we started in March. It was early 2010 that we met the doctors, and the two male doctors first, and then about a year later we met the female doctors in person for the first time. But so we were probably, we probably spent about 12 weeks in the clinic, we think, and then more time just filming with the protesters and other things like that. A lot of people have said, wow, you must have spent so much time trying to find like these patients with such compelling stories. And well, it's true that we spent a lot of time waiting for for someone to want to be in the film. We actually, those patients are very representative of the patients at large. I mean, that's a random sampling of patients who are there. People like that are there at the clinics every single week. So it's not, they're not like cherry picked in any way. These are fairly typical stories that the clinics see every week.
And I mean, it's not an equivalent at all, but what I was thinking of when watching, going through the process of having to turn down some of these women.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if there was ever that pain of you having to cut a story that you really thought would be in that. Did that happen at all? Or?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those movies we never had a 4-hour cut or something. I think it was pretty clear what content we wanted to be in the movie, and there were definitely the patients who we didn't include in the film. Actually finding a way to introduce these patient stories in a way that didn't make the audience incredibly judgmental and against them right from the get-go, because that is actually incredibly challenging, because people all bring their own personal experience and everyone's thinking, what would I do in this situation? So we eventually structured the film in the way that starts with the patient cases that are the most easy to understand. So you get over that initial fear that a lot of people have of third trimester abortion, just at the subject by being like, okay, I can at least understand this one case. And then over the course of the film, the cases get more and more complicated and more ethically gray. So until towards the end, you're really pushed to go further and further and think about it more and more as you go throughout the film, is what we found to work the best in the end.
I mean, I think that there's always we worked really hard to make sure that the cases were sort of representative of what's really happening at the clinic. And I think the only thing you see an email in the film, that's the story of a young woman who is pregnant for the second time, and very late, and talks about having sort of feeling like she may try to commit suicide or hurt herself or abort herself if she can't get this abortion done. And I think that's sort of the only case that we the email is a great representation of it, but those cases are so sensitive that it was not really possible for us to find someone like that who wanted to be on camera in the film. But I think we were able with the email and just reading that story to be able to create a pretty good cross-section of the reasons why people come to the clinic.
And it gets touched on the issue of morality, obviously, which is going to factor into it. And I think you summarized it perfectly, of how beginning with something that's easy to digest and then moving through to something that is more morally ambiguous. And one of the doctors says at one point, she doesn't refer to it as a fetus, she says it's a baby. And I guess I just was wondering about your choice then to make it a moral issue, which is something that not a lot in the pro-choice movement happens. So that's not something that normally happens.
Absolutely. I mean, it's amazing in retrospect to look back at the talking points for the pro-choice and the anti-abortion sides of the issue, how what are people arguing about? It's really a lot of abstract intellectual ideas, It's this war of ideas and everyone's screaming at each other. It's incredibly polarizing. And then when you get into the clinic, when you meet these patients, those kind of abstract ideas and those polemical talking points have nothing to do with how they found themselves in this situation, why they're making this decision. You know, they're not arguing about where conceptually does life begin. You know, that isn't really the issue here. The issue is what's going on in this woman's life. Can she handle this pregnancy now? You know, that was amazing to us. And so, you know, in reality, the doctors know better than anyone that this issue is not black and white. It's incredibly gray. And we loved that they recognized that, and they were so candid, as you mentioned, for example, in that scene, with acknowledging their own personal ambiguity around some of the stuff in this. That was so great, because people come to us after the movie and say, I'm so grateful that that doctor acknowledged this about it, you know, that she thinks of them as babies, that this is different than early abortion, because that's what everyone feels. And in order to understand this, you have to get someone who can see where you're coming from, accept that, but what are you thinking of? I'm thinking of where the woman's coming from, so that's why I'm doing, you know, whatever it is. It's so important to it was really important to us to embrace the ambiguity and the complexity here.
And so this premiered at Sundance, and you won a $5,000 grant from the Women in Film as well.
Yeah.
Congratulations on that.
So funny. They announced us that we're giving you a grant. They gave us a huge cardboard check. It was like we were on an incredible game show or something.
Could you take that
figure out? Yeah.
Oh yeah, they mailed it to us.
I was going to say, is that carry-on?
So we're still trying to figure out where exactly it will look best on our.
And do you have plans then for the actual concrete money, that not just you wherever the phony check will hang, or are you working?
That money's long gone in like post-production costs, unfortunately.
I figured that might be the case. But is there anything else that you then plan on working on? Are you plan on collaborating again? Because that seems to be working well.
Yeah. Well, right now we're actually working on separate projects for the future. I'm just starting to research a project about marriage counseling in prison.
And I've been working for a little while on a film about this French woman who ran fraudulent film festivals and film distribution companies in the U.S. So that's still in progress. We're shooting a little bit more, and then post-production. And
one good thing about that grant, though, is that the woman who runs Women in Film gave us the check, and we did have to spend all the money on post-production costs, but she made us swear that we would use some of the money to each get a massage. We had to promise. And so we did get a massage out of this, which was really nice, a great reward at the end of everything. So.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
No, not at all. And hopefully you can now make your screenings. I think that's what I was told.
Yeah,
that you have to dirt off.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you guys.
Really nice to meet you.
Yeah.